Let me tell you something. I've thought about that morning almost every day since it happened, and I still don't have the words for it. Not really. But I'm going to try because I think somebody should hear it the way I saw it, not the way the newspapers wrote it up, not the version with the headlines and the slow-motion footage and the music. The real one. The one where you could smell the smoke and hear the screaming and feel your own heart trying to climb out of your chest. I was there, right there, maybe 40 feet away from him. And what that man did, what he didn't do, I'll carry it for the rest of my life. So stay with me, this one's worth it. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because I'd told myself I'd go home on the Wednesday, and I was already thinking about packing. London in late spring, the kind of morning where the sky can't decide what it wants to be. Gray one minute, then this thin, watery sunlight breaking through, then gray again. You know the type. Everyone walking around with a jacket they don't quite need but won't take off either. I'd come over for a wedding. My cousin married an Englishman, lovely fellow, dull as a Sunday afternoon but kind, and the wedding had been the weekend before, so I'd stayed on. Gave myself a few extra days to wander. I'm the sort who likes to walk a city until my feet give out. No plan, just walking. You see more that way. You see the small things. That morning I'd had a coffee near Marble Arch and decided to cut down through the edge of Hyde Park toward the Embassy District. There's a stretch there, you know it if you've been, where the grand old buildings sit shoulder to shoulder. Flags out front. Brass plates by the doors. Black railings, polished, the kind that look like they've never had a speck of rust in 200 years. Quiet street. Or it was quiet. There was a guard posted near one of the buildings. Now, and I have to be careful here because people get this wrong, he wasn't one of the bearskin hat fellows you see outside the palace with the tourists snapping photos. This was different. He was in ceremonial dress, yes, but he was attached to a security detail for a diplomatic event that was happening that week. There'd been some kind of summit, heads of state coming and going. You'd see the cars. Long black things with the little flags on the bonnet, gliding past like they owned the road. Which, that week, I suppose they did. So this guard, he was standing at his post by the railings near the corner where the embassy building met the green of the park, rigid, still, the way they're trained to be, hands at his sides, eyes forward. And I actually remember thinking this, how does anyone do that all day? How do you just stand? I stopped to watch him for a minute, couldn't help it. There's something about that stillness. It's almost unnatural. Pigeons would land near his boots and he wouldn't flinch. A kid ran up and made a face at him, pulled the corner of his mouth out with a finger and the guard didn't move a muscle, not a flicker. The kid's mum dragged him off, embarrassed, and the guard just kept staring straight ahead like the boy had never existed. I smiled at that. I remember smiling. I want you to hold onto that picture. The ordinary one. The pigeons, the kid, the gray sky, the polished railings. Because it's going to matter later how ordinary it all was. How nothing about that morning told you what was coming. There was a small crowd building near the corner. Tourists mostly. A walking tour, I think. One of those groups where everyone's got the same little radio earpiece in and the guide holds up a colored umbrella so nobody gets lost. The guide was a young woman with a loud, cheerful voice. She was telling them about the architecture, pointing up at the cornices and the windows. Half the group wasn't even listening. They were too busy looking at the guard. There was an older couple, Americans I think by the accents. The husband had one of those enormous cameras around his neck, the kind that cost more than my car. He kept stepping closer to the guard to get a better shot. His wife kept tugging his sleeve. Frank, you're too close, Frank. He wasn't too close. People always think they're too close. There were two young men in football shirts, drinking cans of something at 9:30 in the morning, which tells you the kind of week they were having. There was a woman with a pram. A delivery rider had stopped his bike against the railings further down and was looking at his phone. And there was a man, and I'll get to him, because he's the reason this whole thing started, a man in a gray suit who'd been walking back and forth on the pavement like he was waiting for somebody. I noticed him because he kept checking his watch. Big expensive watch, the suit a little too sharp, the kind of person who looks like they're always about to be late for something important. He had this energy to him. Tense. Wound up. I figured he was some diplomat or aide or whatever, late for a meeting at one of the embassies. London's full of men like that, marching about like the whole world's waiting on them. Then he walked up to the guard. Now, here's where I have to slow down, because this is the part everyone gets wrong when they tell it. The man in the gray suit walked straight up to the guard and started talking to him. I couldn't hear it all at first. I was maybe 40 feet off, leaning against a lamppost, just being nosy the way you do, but I could see the shape of it. The man was pointing past the guard toward the embassy gate. He wanted through, and the guard wasn't moving. I drifted a bit closer. I'm not proud of it, but I'm a nosy person and this looked interesting, so I closed the gap. And now I could hear him. "Understand who I am," the man was saying. His voice had that clipped, impatient edge. "I have an appointment. I'm expected. Now you're going to let me through this gate." The guard said nothing, just stared straight ahead past the man, the way he'd stared past the kid earlier. That made the man angrier. You could see it, the color coming up in his neck. "I'm talking to you," he said. "Do you understand English? I said open the gate. I'm not going to be made late because you won't do your job." Still nothing. The guard was a wall, eyes forward, jaw set. He didn't even acknowledge the man was there. And I'll be honest, part of me was loving it. There's a certain pleasure, isn't there, in watching a man like that, all puffed up, all "do you know who I am" bounce off something he can't move. The guard couldn't have been more than 25, young face under the cap, but he had this stillness that made the suited man look like a child having a tantrum. The man stepped in closer, right into the guard's space, jabbed a finger toward his chest, not quite touching but close. "You will open this gate, or I will have your name and your number and your job by this afternoon. Do you hear me? I will have you out." And the guard, for the first time, moved, just slightly. He shifted his weight, turned his head a fraction, and said quietly, "But I heard it, step back from the post, sir." That was all, "Step back from the post, sir," calm as anything. The man laughed, an ugly little laugh, or what? The guard didn't answer. He just looked at him. And there was something in that look, I can't describe it well, but it wasn't anger. It wasn't even annoyance. It was the look of a man who knows exactly what his job is and knows that this fool in the suit is not going to be the thing that makes him forget it. A patient look, almost sad. The man muttered something I won't repeat and turned away, stalking off down the pavement, still checking his watch. And I thought that was the end of it. A small, silly bit of street theater. Something to tell my cousin about over dinner. You'll never guess what I saw outside an embassy today. I checked my own watch, 9:45. I want you to remember that time, 9:45, because in about 4 minutes the whole world was going to come apart. Let me set it for you properly, the way it was right then, in those last ordinary minutes. The walking tour had moved off a little, drifting toward the park gates. The American couple were still there, Frank still angling for his perfect shot. The 2 football lads were laughing at something on a phone. The woman with the pram had stopped to fuss over the baby. The delivery rider was getting back on his bike. And the man in the gray suit, the angry one, he'd crossed the road and was standing on the far pavement by the edge of the park, still fuming, still glancing at his watch like time itself had personally wronged him. The sun came out properly for a second. I remember the railings catching the light. The whole street went gold for just a moment. One of those moments where you think, despite everything, that the world is a beautiful place and you're lucky to be in it. And then there was a sound. I've tried to describe this sound to people and I always fail. It wasn't like in films. In films, a bomb is this big theatrical boom with a fireball and the music swells. This wasn't like that. It was more like the air got punched. A flat, enormous crack that you didn't so much hear as feel. It went through me. Through my chest, my teeth, the soles of my feet. The ground jumped. Actually jumped like something underneath the city had shrugged. It came from the park side, down toward the road beyond where the angry man was standing. I learned later it was a vehicle, parked. I won't go into the details, I don't know them all and I don't want to frankly, but it was real. It was the real thing. A bomb near Hyde Park on an ordinary Tuesday in late spring. For a second, and it's a strange thing this, for a second nothing happened. The sound went off and then there was this silence. A complete, total silence, like the world holding its breath. Even the pigeons had gone. I remember standing there with my ears ringing, not understanding. My brain just refused to make sense of it. What was that? What was that? What was that? And then the silence broke, and everything became noise. Smoke first. A gray-black column of it rolling up from the road, climbing into that pretty golden light and turning it filthy. Then the smell, and the smell is the thing I'll never lose. The smell got into my clothes and my hair and stayed for days, burnt rubber and something chemical and something else underneath that I won't name. Then the screaming. People scattered, that's the only word. Scattered like birds when a stone goes into a flock. The walking tour broke apart, the colored umbrella down on the pavement, the guide gone, people running in every direction, some toward the noise. There are always a few who run toward it, God bless them, but most of them away, faces white, mouths open. The American woman was screaming her husband's name. Frank was on the ground. He'd been knocked down by the blast wave, or maybe he'd just fallen, I don't know. But he was down and his camera was smashed on the pavement, and he was crawling and his wife was screaming. The two football lads had frozen. Just frozen, cans still in their hands, staring at the smoke like they couldn't believe it. The woman with the pram, God, the woman with the pram. She'd been knocked sideways into the railings and the pram had rolled. It had rolled a few feet toward the road, and she was screaming and trying to get up and her leg wasn't working right and the pram was rolling. And there was glass everywhere because every window on that street had blown in at once. That's the thing nobody tells you. The glass. It wasn't the bomb that did most of the cutting that morning. It was the windows. Every pane on that beautiful old street came apart at the same instant and rained down like ice. I had glass in my hair. I had a cut on my forearm I didn't even feel until an hour later. There was glass on the pavement, glass in the road, glass catching that filthy light and throwing it around like the whole street was made of broken diamonds. And I just stood there. I'm ashamed of it now, but I'll tell you the truth, I just stood there frozen, my brain still trying to catch up. What was that? What do I do? What was that? My legs wouldn't work. I've heard people talk about fight or flight. Nobody tells you about the third one, the one where you just freeze, where you become a statue while the world burns around you. I think I might have stood there forever. I think I might still be standing there in a way, some part of me. Except that I looked over at the guard. I looked over at the guard, and the guard had not moved. Let me say that again, because it took me a long time to understand it myself. The bomb had gone off, the real thing, 40, 50 yards away. Every window on the street had shattered. The air was full of smoke and screaming and falling glass. Every single living soul on that pavement was running or down or frozen. And the guard was still standing at his post. Same stance, hands at his sides, eyes forward, chin level. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't ducked. He hadn't run. While grown men were crawling on the ground and women were screaming and the whole world was coming apart, that young man in his ceremonial dress stood by the railings of the embassy he'd been told to guard, and he did not move. And I remember the thought that went through me, clear as a bell, cutting right through the panic. He's still on duty. That was it. That was the thing. The bomb hadn't relieved him. Nobody had told him to stand down. And so he stood. Because that was the post, and he was the man at the post, and until somebody told him otherwise, that was where he was going to be. I can't tell you what that did to me. Even now, telling you, I feel it in my throat. There was something about that stillness in the middle of all that chaos. It was like, you know how when everything is spinning, you fix your eyes on one still point so you don't fall over. He was the still point. He was the one thing in that whole nightmare that hadn't lost its head. And the moment I saw him, something in me unfroze. I don't fully understand it. But seeing one person hold steady made it possible for me to move. So I moved. I went for the pram first. I don't know why. I think because it was the worst thing, the rolling pram, and the worst thing is the thing your eyes can't leave. It had rolled almost to the curb. I don't remember running. I just remember suddenly having my hands on the handle, dragging it back, and the baby inside it was screaming, which was the best sound I've ever heard because screaming means breathing, screaming means alive. The mother was on the ground by the railings, her leg twisted under her, and she was reaching toward us and crying, and I got the pram to her, and I knelt down and I said something. I don't even know what, something useless. You're okay. The baby's okay. I've got you. The sort of thing that means nothing and everything. And while I was down there, kneeling on the broken glass with this woman and her child, I looked up, and the guard was still standing. But now, and this is the part I have to get right, because this is the part that matters, now I could see his face properly. And his face wasn't a wall anymore. His face was a young man's face, terrified, absolutely terrified. His eyes were huge and there were tears running down his cheeks, just running, and his jaw was clenched so hard I could see it shaking. He was scared out of his mind. He was a frightened kid in a costume in the middle of a bombing. And he had not moved. Do you understand what I'm telling you? It wasn't that he wasn't afraid. He was the most afraid person on that street. He felt every bit of it. Maybe more because he understood better than the rest of us what it might mean, another device, a second blast. They always tell you to fear the second one. He knew all that. And he stood there anyway, shaking, crying, terrified, and rooted to that spot like the railings themselves had grown up through his boots. That's the thing about courage, I've decided. I used to think brave people weren't scared. I had it completely backwards. The brave ones are the ones who are scared right down to the bone and stand there regardless. The guard wasn't fearless. He was the opposite of fearless, and he stood his post anyway. I'll never forget his face as long as I live. Tears on his cheeks, eyes forward, not moving. The smoke was getting thicker now and people were coughing. Somewhere a car alarm was going off, that stupid cheerful electronic wail, completely insane against everything else. I could hear sirens starting up in the distance, faint, then louder. London responds fast. You don't think about that until you need it, but they're fast. The angry man, the one in the gray suit who'd been shouting at the guard, I'd lost track of him in all of it. But I found him again now. He was on the far pavement on his knees and he wasn't angry anymore. The blast had been closer to him than to us. He'd been knocked flat. His sharp suit was torn and gray with dust and one side of his face was bleeding, a long shallow cut along the cheekbone. His expensive watch was still on his wrist. He was staring at his own hands like he didn't recognize them. And here's the thing that I still turn over in my mind. Of all the people on that street, he was the one who'd been closest to the embassy gate when it happened. The gate he'd been screaming to get through. The gate the guard had refused to open. I don't know if that means anything. Probably it doesn't. Probably it's just where he happened to be standing, but I've thought about it more than I should. The man who tried to command the guard, the man who'd wanted so badly to get through, and the young soldier who said no, step back from the post, sir, and held the line. Funny how a thing can look like an insult 1 minute and turn out to be something else entirely. I helped the woman with the pram get back against the railings, away from the road, and I told her help was coming. The sirens. Hear the sirens, they're coming. And they were. And while I waited there with her, holding her hand because she'd grabbed mine and wouldn't let go, I kept looking back at the guard. Still standing, still crying, still there. People were starting to gather themselves now. The football lads had dropped their cans, and one of them was helping Frank up off the ground. The American woman had stopped screaming and was just holding her husband's face in her 2 hands, sobbing, checking him over. A man in a suit who turned out to be a doctor, there's always one, was moving from person to person, calm and quick. And through all of it, that young man held his post by the embassy railings, in the smoke and the glass and the screaming, and did not move. I didn't know yet what the next 10 minutes would bring. I didn't know about the second thing, and there was a second thing, a worse thing in some ways that would test him even further. I didn't know what he'd do when it came. But I knew, kneeling there in the broken glass with a stranger's hand crushing mine, watching a terrified young soldier stand his ground in the middle of hell, I knew I was looking at the bravest thing I had ever seen. And it wasn't over yet, so there I was, kneeling on broken glass, a stranger's hand crushing the bones in mine, a pram with a screaming baby pulled back from the curb, and 40 feet away, a young soldier standing his post in the smoke, tears running down his face, not moving. I want to pick it up right there, because the next part is the part I almost can't believe, even though I saw it with my own eyes. The sirens were getting closer. You could hear them now, that two-note wail bouncing off the buildings, growing. And there's a feeling that comes when you hear that, a loosening. Your body starts to believe that someone else is coming to take the weight. You think, okay, it's nearly over. The grown-ups are coming. That feeling lasted about 30 seconds. Because that's when I noticed the second thing. Let me back up. When the bomb went off, all of us, every single person on that street, turned our eyes toward the smoke, toward the road, the park edge where it had happened. That's natural. That's where the danger was. That's where the screaming was loudest. But the embassy was behind us, behind the guard, and in those first wild minutes nobody was looking at it. Why would you? The threat was the other way. I only turned because of the smell. There was a new smell cutting through the burn-trubber stink of the blast, sharper, and I turned my head just to find where it was coming from, and I saw it. There was smoke coming from inside the embassy building. Not a lot, a thin gray thread of it curling out from one of the upper windows, one of the windows that had blown in, and I remember thinking in my stupid, shocked way, that's odd. Why is there smoke up there? It took me a long, slow second to understand. The blast. The blast had thrown something, debris maybe, or it had knocked something over inside, or the electrics had sparked when the windows came in. I don't know the cause. Nobody ever fully told me. But there was a fire starting inside that building, on an upper floor, and the building was not empty. I knew it wasn't empty because I'd seen people at those windows earlier, before any of this. When I'd first stopped to watch the guard, I'd seen figures moving behind the glass up there. Staff. Whoever works in a place like that. And now one of those windows was open, blown open, and there was smoke, and then there was a face. A woman, up on what I think was the 3rd floor. She'd come to the broken window and she was waving. Both arms. And even over all the noise, even with the car alarm and the sirens and the crying, I could hear her, thin and high and desperate, calling down, calling for help. And she wasn't alone. There was someone behind her in the window, lower, smaller. A child. Now I need you to understand the geography of this, because it's the whole thing. The guard's post was at the corner by the railings, right at the foot of the embassy. The gate he'd refused to open for the angry man was about 15 feet to his left. Behind that gate, a short path led to the embassy's main door. And above that door, 3 floors up, was the window with the woman and the child and the smoke. So the guard was the closest person in the world to that door. And the door was presumably locked. I watched him. I couldn't not. Because I understood, the way you understand things in a crisis without anyone explaining them, that he was the one. Whatever happened next, it was going to happen because of him, or it wasn't going to happen at all. The doctor was busy across the street with Frank and the others. The football lads were holding people up. I was pinned by a terrified mother who would not let go of my hand. The sirens were close, but close isn't here, and a fire on a 3rd floor doesn't wait for close. It was him, it was on him. And here's the thing that nobody who wasn't there can really feel. His orders, his actual, literal orders, were to stand at that post and let nobody through that gate. That's what the post was. That morning, with the summit on and the threats they must have known about, his entire job, the only job, was, this gate does not open. You do not leave this spot. He'd just proven he'd die before he broke that. He'd stood through a bomb. He'd stood through the glass and the smoke and his own terror. He'd refused a man who'd screamed in his face. The whole point of him was that he did not move. And now there was a woman and a child in a window above his head, and the only way to them ran straight through the line he'd sworn to hold. I saw the war happen on his face. I did. I was close enough. He looked up. For the first time since the blast, he broke his forward stare and he looked up, at the window, at the woman waving, at the small shape beside her, at the smoke. And his whole face changed. The terror was still there, but something came in underneath it. A kind of agony. Because he understood exactly what I understood and faster than I did. He looked up at them. Then he looked at the gate. Then he looked, and I'll never forget this, he looked down the street, the direction help would come from. Searching for it. Please be here. Please, somebody, be here so I don't have to be the one. I know that look. I've felt it. The look of a person hopping with everything they have that the choice will be taken off them. The sirens wailed, close, but no engine had turned the corner yet. No one was coming, not in time, he knew it. And I watched a 20-something-year-old soldier stand there for what felt like an hour and was probably 3 seconds, holding the entire weight of it. His orders on one side, 2 human beings on the other, a fire that didn't care about either. Then he moved. He moved fast. That's what struck me. After all that stillness, hours of it, a bomb's worth of it, when he finally broke, he broke like a sprinter off the blocks. He didn't fumble. He didn't hesitate once he decided. It was like all that frozen energy had been coiling up the whole time, and it all went off at once. He turned to the gate. There was a keypad or a lock of some kind. I couldn't see the detail, and he did something to it fast, and the gate came open, and he was through it and up the path before I'd even fully registered that he'd left his post. And the strangest thought went through me as he ran. He's broken his orders, not as a criticism, as pure astonishment. The one man who would not move had just abandoned the post he defended through a bombing, and he'd done it not to save himself. He could have run when the bomb went off. Anyone would have forgiven him for running when the bomb went off. He'd done it to run toward a burning building. The door must have been locked because I saw him put his shoulder to it. Once, twice, it didn't give. And he stepped back and kicked it, flat-footed, hard, right beside the handle, the way you're apparently meant to, and on the 3rd or 4th try the frame splintered and the door swung in and he was gone. Inside. Into the smoke. And then there was nothing. Just the open black doorway and the thread of smoke from the 3rd floor getting thicker. I have never wanted to do something so badly and been so unable to. The mother was still gripping my hand. The pram was still there. I couldn't leave them at the curb in the chaos. And what would I have done anyway? Followed a trained soldier into a burning embassy. I'd have just been one more body for someone to drag out. So I did the only thing I could do. I watched the window. The woman was still there, coughing now. You could see her bending into it. The child had its arms around her. The smoke behind them was no longer a thread. It was a wall. Come on, I was saying. Out loud, I think. Come on, come on, come on. As if I could pull him up those stairs by force of wanting it. While that was happening, and this is the bit I find hardest to forgive myself for not noticing sooner, the angry man was up. The man in the gray suit, the one who'd screamed at the guard, the one who'd been knocked flat by the blast, bleeding from the cheek, staring at his own hands. He was on his feet now, and he'd seen the whole thing too. He'd seen the guard go in, and I watched his face do something I didn't expect. He wasn't sneering anymore. He wasn't checking his watch. He was staring at that open doorway with an expression I can only call shame, pure, naked shame. And then he did something. He stumbled toward the gate, the open gate, the gate he'd wanted so badly to get through 20 minutes before, when getting through it had meant a meeting and his own importance. And now he went through it and up the path toward the splintered door. I thought he was going in after the guard. I genuinely did. And some ungenerous part of me thought, what good are you going to be? But that's not what he did. He stopped at the doorway. He didn't go in. Instead, he turned around in the doorway, facing back out toward the street, and he started shouting, directing, pointing, waving people back from the building, clearing a space below the windows, shouting at the football lads to help him. And they did. They went to him, and the three of them started moving people, dragging them back, opening up the pavement below that third-floor window. It took me a moment to understand. They were making a clear space, because if those two people in the window had no other way down, if the stairs were gone, if the smoke was too much, then the only way out was the window, and someone had to be ready below. I'll say this for the angry man. When it mattered, when it actually mattered and not just to his own schedule, he turned out to have something in him after all. Funny, isn't it? You think you've got a person sized up, the pompous fool, and then the world cracks open and you find out you didn't know the first thing about them. The seconds stretched out. I don't know how long he was inside. It felt like a year. The smoke from the third floor was pouring now, ugly and black, and the woman had pulled back from the window. You couldn't see her anymore, and I thought, God help me, I thought the worst. I thought he hadn't made it to them. I thought we were going to stand on that pavement and watch. The first fire engine came round the corner then. Red and roaring, the noise of it filling the whole street, and firefighters were dropping off it before it had fully stopped, and one of them was looking up at the window and another was running for the door and shouting into a radio. The grown-ups. Finally. But the door already had a man through it. They didn't know that. How could they? And that's when the guard came back to the window. He appeared in the smoke up on the third floor, and he had the child in his arms. The small one. He'd got the child. He leaned out into the air, gulping it, coughing, and the firefighters below saw him, and there was this sudden surge of movement. People shouting, there, third floor, two of them, a child. But he couldn't get them down himself. There was no way down from inside. The smoke must have taken the stairs behind him. He was trapped up there now too. He'd gone in to save them, and now there were three people in the window instead of two, and the fire between all of them and the ground. The firefighters were fast. They were so fast. The ladder started coming up off the engine, swinging toward the building, and a firefighter was climbing it before it had even reached the wall. And I was watching the guard hold that child out over the drop, holding it as far toward the rising ladder as he could reach, his arms shaking. You could see them shaking from the street, his face black with smoke, leaning out so far I thought he'd fall, just to shorten the distance by those last few inches. The whole street had gone silent. Even the car alarm seemed to have given up. Everyone was looking up. Hundreds of eyes on that window, on that man and that child and that gap of empty air. The firefighter reached the top of the ladder, reached out. And there was this moment, this one terrible moment, where the child was held between the two of them, the guard's arms and the firefighter's arms, suspended over nothing, 3 floors of empty air below. The handover, the most dangerous part of the whole thing. If anyone slipped, if anyone's grip went. Nobody slipped. The firefighter took the child, drew it in against his chest, and started down the ladder, careful, the slowest descent in the history of the world, and the child's arms were wrapped around his neck so tight you could see it even from the ground. And the street erupted. People cheering, crying, that mad release of sound that comes out of a crowd when it's been holding its breath too long. The American woman, Frank's wife, had her hands pressed over her mouth and tears pouring down. The football lads were yelling. Even the doctor, the calm one, the one who'd been calm through everything, even he had stopped and was looking up with his hand on his head. But it wasn't done. There was still the woman, and there was still the guard. The ladder went back up. The same firefighter or another, I couldn't tell anymore. My eyes were stinging from the smoke and from other things. The woman next. She was harder. She was an adult, frightened, half overcome by the smoke, and getting her out of that window onto the ladder took longer. And every second it took, the smoke got worse, and the orange of actual flame started to show now behind the glass of the windows beside her. The guard helped her, the whole time. I could see him behind her, steadying her, his hands on her, talking to her. You could see his mouth moving even if you couldn't hear it, calming her, getting her turned, getting her out onto the rungs, holding her until the firefighter had her. The last thing he did before letting her go was, I swear, he checked her grip, made sure her hands had the ladder before his hands left her. Even then. Even up there, choking, the building burning around him, he was making sure of someone else first. And then she was going down, and the crowd was roaring again, and there was only him left. One man, in a burning window, in a uniform meant for standing still. The flames were properly through now. I could see them inside the room behind him, that awful living orange. The smoke was a solid thing, and the ladder was coming back up for him, but slowly. Everything takes so long, and I remember the whole crowd just willing it upward, every single one of us leaning forward like we could push the ladder faster with our bodies. He'd climbed up onto the window ledge, crouched there in the smoke, one hand on the frame, looking down at the ladder rising toward him, and behind him the room was a furnace. And people argue about this part, but I saw it. I was looking right at him. He looked down at the street, at all of us. The whole crowd of strangers staring up at him, and for just a second, just one, he straightened up. On that ledge, in the smoke and the heat, with a fire at his back and a drop at his feet, that young soldier pulled himself up straight, and I don't know how else to say it, he held himself like he was on parade, shoulders back, chin level. The same stillness, 3 floors up in a burning window that he'd held by the railings all morning. It lasted a heartbeat. Then the smoke folded around him and he had to drop back into a crouch and start coughing again. But I saw it. For 1 second, even up there, even then, he was still the man at the post. The ladder reached him, he got onto it, and he came down. He came down slow, and you could see he was nearly finished, his legs going on the rungs, a firefighter climbing up below to steady him for the last part. And when he got near the bottom, his boots touched the ground and his legs just went. Folded right under him. He didn't fall hard. There were a dozen hands there to catch him. But he went down onto the pavement on his knees in the smoke and the broken glass, gasping, his face black, his uniform ruined, shaking all over. And the whole street went up. I've never heard anything like it. Hundreds of people, all of them crying and cheering at once. The sound bouncing off the broken buildings and rolling up the street and into the gray sky. He'd done it. He'd left his post, broken his orders, gone into the fire and brought them both out. But I want to tell you what happened in the next minute. Because what happened in the next minute is the part that broke my heart, and it's the part that the cheering crowd didn't even see. I saw it because I was watching him and not the ladder. So the minute after, the whole street is cheering. The child is safe in a firefighter's arms across the road. The woman is down, wrapped in a silver blanket, alive. And the guard is on his knees on the pavement, black with smoke, shaking, surrounded by hands that want to help him. And here's what he did. I want you to picture it, because nobody who was watching the ladder saw it, but I was watching him, and I'll carry it forever. He tried to stand up. Not to be helped to his feet, not to lean on someone. He pushed the hands away gently, but he pushed them away, and he got one boot under himself and then the other, and he hauled himself up off that pavement on legs that did not want to hold him. He swayed. A firefighter reached for him and he waved him off. And then this young man who'd just come out of a burning building, who could barely stand, who was coughing up the inside of a fire. He turned and he started walking back toward the gate. Back toward his post. I didn't understand it at first. I thought he was confused. Smoke does that, they say, it muddles you, but it wasn't confusion. I watched his face and there was no confusion in it. There was only that same terrible sense of duty that had kept him standing through the bomb. In his mind, in whatever was left working in his mind right then, the emergency was over, the people were out, and that meant there was only one thing left to do. Return to the post. Resume the watch. He'd left his station, and a part of him, the deepest part, the part they must drill into them until it's bone deep, could not rest until he was back on it. He got about 4 steps, 4 steps toward those railings weaving before his body finally refused, and he went down again, and this time he stayed down. That's the moment, if you want to know. People ask me what the bravest thing I saw that day was. They expect me to say going into the fire. And going into the fire was brave, God knows. But it wasn't the bravest thing. The bravest thing was a half-dead boy who'd already done more than anyone could ask of any human being, trying to crawl back to his post because he hadn't been told he could stop. I lost it then. I'm not ashamed to say it. I'd held it together through the bomb and the glass and the pram and all of it, and that was the thing that finally took me apart. A grown man, on his knees with a stranger's child clinging to me, because the mother with the pram had pressed her baby into my arms at some point. I don't even remember when, crying my eyes out at the sight of a soldier trying to stand up. The medics got to him, 2 of them. They got him onto a stretcher and he was arguing with them. You could see it weakly, trying to point at the gate, and one of the medics, an older woman, calm, kind face, she leaned right down close to his ear and said something to him. I was near enough by then to hear it. She said, "You're relieved, love. You're relieved. Someone else has the watch now. You can rest. You're relieved." And I watched the fight go out of him, just like that. The moment somebody with authority told him, in words his training could accept, that he was relieved of his post, his whole body let go. His head went back on the stretcher. His eyes closed. He'd been holding himself up by sheer order, by the chain of command, and the second that chain told him to stand down, there was nothing left holding him up at all. They carried him to the ambulance, and as they did, the crowd, and this is the part that gets me, the crowd started to clap. Not cheering now, clapping. That steady, solemn kind of clapping. It spread up the street, person to person, a few at first and then all of them, hundreds of people lining a broken, smoking street, applauding a stretcher as it went past. The football lads, the American couple, the doctor, the woman he'd carried down, sitting up in her silver blanket, both hands going. Strangers, all of them, clapping a man most of them would never see again and would never forget. And the angry man. I have to tell you about the angry man. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, the man in the gray suit, the one who'd screamed, "Do you know who I am, and I'll have your job by this afternoon." His suit was ruined, his face was bleeding, and he was watching the stretcher go past and he was clapping too. But his face was destroyed, because he, of all the people on that street, knew exactly what he'd said to that man this morning. He'd threatened to have him sacked for doing his job, for standing his post. For being, it turned out, the finest human being any of us would ever lay eyes on. I watched him push forward as the stretcher passed. He said something to the guard. I couldn't hear it over the clapping, but I saw the shape of it and I saw his face when he said it, and I can't be sure, but I think it was "I'm sorry." 2 words, "I'm sorry." From a man who I'd have bet money never said those words to anyone in his life. I don't know if the guard heard him. His eyes were closed by then, but the man said it anyway, and I think he needed to say it more than the guard needed to hear it. That's how it works sometimes, isn't it? The ambulance doors closed, and it pulled away through the wreckage, slow, the crowd parting for it, and that was the last I ever saw of him. Now the aftermath. People always want the aftermath. They want to know everyone turned out fine. I can't give you all of it because I left England that Thursday, 2 days later, and I followed it from home the way you follow anything, in pieces, online, second-hand. But here's what I know. The woman from the window lived. Smoke, mostly, and a broken wrist from the fall back into the room, but she lived. The child, the little one he carried out, didn't have a scratch. Not one. The firefighter who took the child off the ladder later said the kid had held onto his neck so hard he had bruises for a week, and he kept them like a medal. Frank, the American with the camera, had a cracked rib and a cut on his head and a smashed camera, and a story he'll be telling at dinner parties until the day he dies. His wife wrote a letter. I read it later. It got shared around, a letter to the British authorities about the young man she'd watched go into a burning building, written by a woman from Ohio who'd come to London to see the changing of the guard, and had instead seen something she said she had no language for. The mother with the pram, I gave her baby back to her when the medics reached us, and she held onto my arm and thanked me over and over, and I kept telling her I hadn't done anything. I'd pulled a pram back from a curb, that's all, and she wouldn't hear it. People need someone to thank. I understood that. I let her thank me, but we both knew who the day really belonged to. And the guard. He lived. I need you to know that first, because I was sick with worry about it for days. He lived. Smoke inhalation, burns to his hands and one arm, from the door, from the child, from the window frame, I don't know which, and they kept him in hospital for a while. But he lived. They didn't release his name at first. Security, the summit, all of that. For weeks he was just the guard. That's how the whole country talked about him, the guard, as if there were only one in the world, and maybe for a while there was. When his name did come out eventually, I won't repeat it here because I don't have his blessing to, and it doesn't matter anyway. What matters is what he was. He was 23. He'd been in the army a little over 2 years. He came from somewhere ordinary, a town nobody famous comes from, and his mum was interviewed once, and she said the thing I think about most. They asked her if she was surprised by what he did, and she said no. She said, he's always been like that, even as a little boy. If you gave him a job, he'd do the job. You couldn't talk him out of it. He'd stand at the door if you told him to stand at the door. He'd stand at the door if you told him to stand at the door. That's the whole man, isn't it? That's everything, right there in a mother's voice. There was an inquiry, of course. There's always an inquiry. And here's a thing that I find almost funny now, though it didn't feel funny at the time. For a little while, in the dry official way these things go, there was a question over whether he'd done the right thing. Because, technically, he'd left his post. He'd opened a gate he was ordered to keep shut. He'd broken procedure. On paper, on the cold paper of it, the man who just performed the bravest act any of us had ever seen had also broken his orders. And I remember reading about that and feeling the anger come up in me. After everything, to sit in a room and weigh up whether a man should have let 2 people burn rather than open a gate. But I'll tell you how it came out, because it restored something in me. The inquiry cleared him completely, more than cleared him. And the line from it that got printed everywhere, the line people remember, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it word for word, was something like, "The highest duty of a guard is not to the gate, but to the people the gate is meant to protect." He'd understood that in 3 seconds, in the middle of a bombing, at 23 years old, with a fire in front of him. It took a room full of senior people in comfortable chairs, several weeks to agree with him. They gave him a medal, a real one, the kind that matters. There were photographs. I've seen them. Him in his dress uniform, bandage still on one hand, standing very straight, of course, standing very straight, receiving it. And in every photograph he looks faintly uncomfortable, the way the truly decent ones always do, like he can't understand what all the fuss is about, like he's thinking I only did the job. I think about that morning more than I've ever told anyone. I think about it at strange times. I'll be doing the washing up, or stuck in traffic, or lying awake at 2 in the morning, and suddenly I'm back on that street with the glass coming down and the smoke going up, and I see him standing there. Not running, not breaking. Tears on his face and his eyes forward and his boots planted like the railings had grown up through them. And I've worked out over the years what it taught me, because it did teach me something. A morning like that doesn't go through you and leave nothing behind. It taught me that courage and fear aren't opposites. I had it wrong my whole life. I thought brave people were the ones without fear. But the bravest man I ever saw was the most frightened person on that street. I saw it on his face, the terror, the tears, and he stood anyway. The fear was the whole point. Without the fear it isn't courage, it's just not understanding the danger. He understood the danger completely, and he stood. And it taught me something about duty too, in a world that mostly sneers at the word. We laugh at it now, don't we? Duty, honor, the post, old-fashioned words. The angry man in the gray suit that morning before the bomb, he was the modern world, wasn't he? Do you know who I am? I'll have your job. I'm more important than your silly rules. And the guard was something older and quieter, and the modern world thought it was a joke, thought it was a man in a costume to take photos with. And then the world cracked open. And it turned out that when everything's on fire and everyone's running, the man who will save your life is the one who took the silly old words seriously. The one who'd stand at the door if you told him to stand at the door. The one who, when the only way to save a stranger's child meant breaking the very thing he'd built his whole self around, broke it without a second thought, and then tried to crawl back and rebuild it before he'd even caught his breath. I think the world owes that kind of man an apology most days. The angry man gave his in 2 words by a stretcher in the smoke. I think the rest of us owe ours too. I went back to that street once, years later. I was in London again and I made myself walk down it. The buildings have been repaired, new glass in all the windows, the brass plates polished, the black railings as clean as ever, like nothing ever happened there at all. There's nothing to mark it. No plaque, no statue. You'd walk past and never know. I stood at the corner by the railings near the spot where his post had been. The sun was out. There were pigeons. A tour group went by with a colored umbrella and a guide pointing up at the cornices. Tourists taking photos. Ordinary, completely ordinary, just like that other Tuesday, right up until it wasn't. And I stood there for a while and I thought about him. The boy who stood his post. I don't know where he is now. Out of the army, probably. Maybe a husband. Maybe a dad. Maybe standing at some other door somewhere doing some other job the way he always would because you couldn't talk him out of it. I hope he's happy. I hope he sleeps well. I hope on the bad nights, and a man who's been through that has bad nights, I hope he knows what the rest of us saw. That for a few minutes on a broken street full of strangers, he was the best of all of us. The still point. The one who held. And here's the thing I came all that way to understand, standing there at that quiet corner in the sun. The bravest people in the world don't look like heroes. They look like a tired young man told to stand somewhere boring and stand still. They're easy to laugh at, right up until the moment everything you love depends on whether one person will hold their ground when every instinct in their body is screaming at them to run. He held his ground. And then, when it counted most, he gave it up for 2 people he'd never met, whose names he never learned. I think that's the closest thing to goodness I'll ever see in this life. A man who'd stand at the door if you told him to, and who'd walk through the fire if someone on the other side needed him more.